In today's video, I'm going to be reviewing the Bishop Holy Trinity Broadhead. Now, Bishop Archery is a company that makes premium broadheads, both 2 and 3 blade versions. And what exactly do I mean by premium? Well, in a nutshell, they're the kind of broadheads that'll give a lot of people sticker shock when they first see how much they cost. But there's a reason for it. They're made here in the US, machined out of single pieces of tool steel. They do all their own R&D, and they're not the kind of broadheads that you're going to replace blades or even treat as disposable. You're going to be able to use them year after year, animal after animal. So the 3 blade versions are a 3 blade cut on contact, and the 2 blade versions are single bevel. And let's dive in a little bit more into the actual design of the heads. I, for a while now, have been a fan of 3 blade cut on contact designs. I have some here that I've used in the past and killed deer with, the Magnus Snuffer SS, also the VPA Terminator. This one is 150 grains, this one is 100 grains. And in the front row here I have the Bishop Holy Trinity in 100 grain. It's a vented model, 125 grain which is non-vented, and 150 grain which is non-vented. What's interesting here is that all 3 of these broadheads, despite being different weights, all have pretty much the same profile. It's just that the 100 grain has vents that the 125 doesn't have, and the 150 grain is thicker. And so when you talk about flight characteristics, generally speaking, the lower the surface area, the better. And the more compact a fixed blade head is, generally the better it flies. So that's why guys with poorly tuned setups can shoot mechanicals well, but they might not be able to shoot fixed heads well. And that's why heads like the QAD Exodus and the Slick Tricks and those type of things have reputations for being good flying broadheads. So when I compare the Bishop versus, say, the Magnus Snuffer, you can see that even though these are both 100 grains, there's a big length difference, an overall surface area difference. So just by looking at the physics of the heads, the Bishop one is going to be a little bit more forgiving in flight. Same thing here when you look at the 150 grains. The Bishop versus the VPA, there's a huge difference in length and overall surface area. So when you talk about forgiveness in flight, the Bishop is going to have the edge, being more compact of a design. Now, that length in archery, it tends to be, especially when you get into fixed blade heads, there's kind of this notion that longer, more gradually tapering broadheads penetrate better. And that can be true up to a certain point, right? That was kind of tested in Ashby's reports, for example. But a longer head also is more prone to tip curling, because there's a lot longer lever arm here than there is here. If you were to chuck both of these broadheads in a vise and try to pound them and get them to bend, this one would bend more, even if they were the exact same type of steel, because of that longer lever arm. So this head is going to be a stronger design, in addition to being a little bit more aerodynamic. So when we're talking about vented versus non-vented designs, typically a vented head is going to be a little bit more forgiving in flight because it has lower surface area. It's also going to be louder, and it's not going to be as strong as its non-vented counterpart. And strength is a large part of the reason that the 100 grain is the only model that Bishop makes that actually has the vents. All of their other broadheads, 125 on up to 200 grain in these Holy Trinity designs, are non-vented. So if I were comparing the 100 versus the 125, this one is slightly quieter in flight. This one is slightly more forgiving in flight. Again, if you're shooting out of a well-tuned bow with a properly spined arrow, it's probably very unlikely that you're actually going to notice much of a difference. It's more kind of when you're at the extremes and you're really torquing your bow hand that things like that really come into play. And again, I just want to touch on why I think it's so unique that they actually took the 150 grain design and kept the same flight characteristics as the 125. They just added a little bit more beef into the head itself. Right? They didn't actually just add like a little bit of extra meat here at the base of the head. They actually put that into thickness in the actual blades. So it's going to make it an overall stronger head than the 125 is. Comparing the longer, thinner VPA versus the 150, I have no doubt that the Bishop 150 is going to be a little bit stronger and tougher of a design than the VPA is. Even though I have nothing against the VPA by any means. It's a great broadhead. I just think that design-wise, I much prefer the shorter, more compact Bishop design. All right, so we've talked about designs. Now let's talk about actual manufacturing materials. Now, of the broadheads pictured here, the VPAs and all the Bishop ones are machined out of a single piece of tool steel and then hardened. When you machine something out of a single piece of steel, it's going to be overall a stronger design because there's no screws, there's no welds, and there's no joints that can act as weak spots. The whole head acts as one. So a head like this is going to have welded blades, so it's not going to be as strong as a head that is machined out of a single piece. It's also generally going to be a little bit less expensive to make a broadhead like this, because to make a machine broadhead, you basically have to take an entire block of steel, the diameter of your cutting diameter, and you got to machine away all of that extra material. So when you're looking at broadheads that have replaceable blades, a lot of times they're stamped out of a very thin sheet of steel, and it's very cheap to make those blades. Machining is definitely by far the most expensive way to manufacture a broadhead. It also just, if you're really looking for that edge and strength, it's really the only way to go. The Bishops, regardless of what size you get, come in 3 different grades of steel. The ones that I have here are 41L40 tool steel. This is their middle of the road option. They also offer a cheaper stainless steel. I shouldn't say cheaper stainless, relatively more affordable compared to the other heads is probably a better way to describe it. They don't give away the details of the actual stainless alloy that they used because they say it's proprietary, but it was chosen to try and maximize durability, at least as much as you can within stainless steels. To get the corrosion resistance that stainless offers, you have to give up certain other attributes, and it simply doesn't compare to what you can get with certain tool steels in terms of measurable toughness. And they also have a higher end S7 tool steel. And even though this 41L40 isn't as impact resistant as the S7, it is quite a bit less expensive. I've done a lot of shooting with this 150 grain head. And what I actually did with this broadhead on one of my shots, I got a little bit aggressive on how far I was shooting, and I put a broadhead underneath the target and basically sunk it about 1 inch into the wood frame that was around the target. And there was no way I was pulling that arrow out, and in fact I unscrewed the arrow and the insert was bent, so I assumed that even if I got the broadhead out, the blades would probably be fine, knowing that this is a very impact resistant tool steel, but that I might have bent the ferrule. So I took a chisel and a hammer and I chiseled away enough wood that I could basically take pliers and actually grab the throat of this broadhead and then wiggle it around until I could actually pop it free. But lo and behold, even after digging that thing out of that inch of wood, it still spins like a top. Often the saying is that the best warranty is the one that you don't have to use. Now, I'm not going to shoot these broadheads into cinder blocks or steel or plywood in this video. Those can provide decent comparisons of one head to the next, and I recommend checking out the Lusk Archery Adventures channel to see those types of comparative tests. I am going to shoot the broadhead through some beef bones. The immense amount of variability in collagen alignment, density, thickness, and shot angle really makes each shot its own case study, which is good for discussion and confidence, but not really great for comparison, so keep that in mind. First shot out of a new breed GX2 at 70 pounds, 29-inch draw, roughly 15 yards, with a 456 grain arrow at 14.7% FOC. Pretty typical within the realm of whitetail hunting setups. So this first shot just shattered the beef bone. One of the larger chunks landed about 15 feet off to the side of the target. The pink that you can see is the marrow, and the white is the actual bone tissue. Broadhead still looks unscathed, and the arrow overall is in still pretty good shape. Bone number 2. This hit was a little bit off center, but still made a pretty hard impact. Notice the missing knock and the pieces of tissue flying off in the slow-mo. When we look at the actual bone, you can see that it did in fact split the bone from top to bottom. The thickness on one side is about the same as the width of my fingernail. Granted, a short bone piece like this doesn't have the structural strength that a full-length bone would have, but it's an interesting result nonetheless. What I'm more interested in looking at is how the broadhead and the arrow fared. Broadhead still looks fine. There are no visible deformations, the tip is still sharp, the polish and the blade still look shiny. However, when I look at the back of the arrow, not only did I lose the knock, but the carbon itself actually cracked. So this arrow is completely shot. Let's touch on sharpening. With a 3-blade cut on contact, either Bishop or other brands, each blade has a total angle of 60 degrees, or 30 degrees on each side of the bevel. That means that they lay totally flat on a surface. Bevels this large don't feel as sharp as smaller angles will. Think about a good fillet knife versus a good hatchet. Different angles for different purposes. This head is still sharp enough that I'll skip the coarse side and go right to the fine side of my DMT diamond stone. I just lay the broadhead flat and pull it back with light pressure a few times on each blade. You'll know it's good once it starts gliding effortlessly. Hear that slight burr scrape against the diamond and how it went away after a couple passes? That must have been what minor damage was sustained after shooting through those bones. After a couple light passes, it's totally fine. I like to finish up with a few strokes on each side with a leather strap block. The one I have is a Knives Plus block from Amazon. Bishop also sells DMT diamond backpack sharpeners on their website in case you want to bring one on a trip. So, my overall opinion of the Bishop Holy Trinity broadheads, I'm an absolutely huge fan of them. I mean, even before I got these broadheads, I was already a fan of the 3-blade cut-on contact non-vented designs. I think they're very strong, they're crazy easy to resharpen. And now that they've taken that design that I already liked and they made it more compact and added thickness to it, making it again even stronger and also a little bit more forgiving in flight, I think is a great thing. So even if they made this broadhead in a really average steel, while I would expect them to cost less, I would still be a fan of that design. And I hope that kind of the overall shooting that I've done with these heads gives you a little bit of an idea on why people are willing to pay for premium steel. I mean, I don't know how many hundreds of arrows I've shot into foam just testing the flight of these broadheads, and you can't even tell that they were even shot out of the package, right? Because that steel just wears so well. And then of course I took that same broadhead, buried it into the target frame, had to dig it out, bent my arrow insert, but the broadhead was still totally ready to use again. Took that broadhead, touched it up on the stone, started shooting it into those beef bones, which are every bit as thick as anything that I would see on a whitetail, and blew right through it. And not only that, but the broadhead is still plenty sharp and you can hardly even tell it was shot, especially after you run it under a little bit of water and get some of that debris off of it. So yeah, I can definitely understand why people are willing to pay for a premium broadhead. This isn't the only one out there. There's a couple brands now where you're paying basically for the price of one broadhead what you're used to paying for a pack of 3. The difference is these broadheads cost a lot to make, whereas your normal pack of 3 broadheads that you can pick up at Cabela's or wherever you're going to buy your stuff cost pennies to dollars to make. Yet there's a lot of marketing and advertisement that goes into their overall budget. And that's what you're paying for with those heads. Whereas these guys, you're paying more for the actual steel and the machining time that goes into making them. With this 3-blade broadhead, 150 grains, being shot out of my compound at 70 pounds, I'd be totally comfortable shooting it at pretty much anything in North America. Anything in the deer family, bears. I don't think it really is going to have that much of an issue. If I was going to go on a dangerous game hunt, then I would probably choose a 2-blade single bevel type of a design, heavier overall arrow weight. I wouldn't use these for, I guess, small game or turkeys. One, because they cost so much. I don't want to be constantly burying them into trees and stuff like that. But the other thing is too, if I want to shoot like a turkey, I'm going to go with a lot larger cutting diameter overall. One of the other things I think is interesting is that they offer all their broadheads in various different types of steel in different cost ranges. So if I wanted to load up my number 1 arrow with an S7 broadhead and then have arrows 2, 3, and 4 loaded up with stainless steel, I could, with the confidence of knowing that those stainless steel broadheads are going to fly exactly the same as the S7 one because they're exactly the same overall shape. The only difference is just the grade of steel that went into it. So I think they definitely have something interesting here. Obviously it's not a product that's going to be for everyone based solely on the cost, but I can tell you right now, I mean, this is definitely the broadhead I'm going to use. This one in my hands that I've shot into the target frame, that I've shot through those beef bones. It's going to be on my number 1 arrow starting in September for whitetails this fall. So I hope this video was helpful, and if you have any additional questions, please leave them in the comments down below. I'll do my best to answer. Thanks for watching.